On this episode of the show, I have with me Shawn Taikratoke. He is CEO and co-founder at Mozee, and we're going to be talking about transportation. We're going to talk about where we're at within that spectrum of self-driving cars, mass transit. There's a lot of things that are changing, evolving, a lot of conversations that we're hearing about, and I'm not really sure what we'll get here and when, but Shawn's going to walk us through a lot of those, and we're going to talk about the actual robotaxi side of this as well, and whether mass transit is going to be solved via that, or is it a modular thing, or what does it look like in the future? We'll see how much of this we can get into with Shawn, but Shawn, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, before we start, Mozee, what do you guys do over there?
Yeah, it started off with how do we mosey people from point A to point B, and over the past 4 years, it's not only how we mosey people, but like how do we move the world forward is what we say now. And but yeah, we're started off as a little bitty startup, building autonomous vehicles focused on public transit. So more focused on that versus the robotaxi play that most of the industry is kind of focused on. But yeah, that's what we do.
Absolutely. Love it. All right. So we're going to be talking about, this obviously is an inflection point in transportation. We're hearing a lot. We've been hearing a lot about it for a long time. I always joke about, my daughter's now at a point where I thought in a few years she's going to learn to drive. And I was like, she's never going to need to learn to drive. This, 15 years ago, I was thinking never. Now I'm like, okay, she's going to have to learn to drive. There's some self-driving features in the car, and that seems like maybe that'll help with, accidents and whatnot, but we're still not there. I guess before we dive in, tell us, where are we in the state of autonomous vehicles in general? And obviously there's various concepts within that. Tell us where we're at in that cycle.
Yeah, in terms of how America is viewing, autonomy, I'll kind of speak from that light. But obviously, right now with there's Waymo and Zoox, and Tesla's doing their thing, and the Bay Area and in Austin, and so you're seeing this massive influx on robotaxis. Robotaxis are not new; they've been around 2013, 2014, especially in the Bay Area. So you're definitely seeing a lot of that kind of percolate throughout the nation. Still largely enough, most people are kind of, apprehensive to it still. Definitely more aware than even 5 years ago on what a robotaxi is. I think, the general public has an understanding of it, but they're still terrified of it. And I always go back to, it's just the idea of a robot driving you from point A to point B. It still makes people a little bit nervous, even though there are a lot of systems in place that, planes, right? Once they get to flight level control in the air, they're largely just a big bus in the sky. And so, but, everyone knows that there's a human in the loop. And so, unless you live on the West Coast or you have a Tesla, largely the industry is pretty apprehensive to it still. So whether it's, regulatory from a societal issue, it's still a problem. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. I guess when we think about robotaxis, obviously, cities are growing. We can't pave over much more of the infrastructure. Where else can we put in new roads to alleviate congestion? Maybe the thought is some of these autonomous vehicles operate more efficiently and help us get to point A to point B faster. I mean, when you view where we're at with the concept of transportation, and everyone could unanimously agree, we all hate traffic. I mean, is it a problem of just we have a lot of cars on the road right now? Is it an infrastructure thing? Because obviously, well, I'll have a follow-up question, but I'm just curious, where does this problem stem and originate from, us sitting in traffic all day?
Yeah, it starts with how America was built, right? America was built around two things, the American car and mass transit. And that worked well for, a little while, right? As population grew, also just how work has changed, especially in, urban dense areas, and especially here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you're definitely seeing kind of the next gen city. And I say that because there's more kind of mixed use, developments, not just here, but across the nation where you live, work, and play in the same area. And so light rail doesn't quite make sense, even though it's worked for many years. And in some states, it actually works really well. Or some cities, like look at like New York, right? Less than 50% of them even have a vehicle, and their rail system hasn't changed in, over 100 years, but it's kind of baked into like the New York City, culture. Outside of New York, most Americans view, public transit kind of like the plague. It's like, I'll, use it if I have to. And then bus systems are the cheapest to implement, but then have the lowest ridership, and also they're the least efficient. And so you're seeing like a mix, almost a cross-pollination of what has worked in the past no longer works today. And on top of that, the where cities are forming, right? And so that's why, again, I think Mozee is like launching it, the timing is pretty incredible, because, like cities are looking for something else, and it's not light rail, it's not a bus system, but, almost like a new way on, how like public transit like looks like today. So, yeah.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I'm in Southern California, and I grew up on the East Coast, but I realized that Southern California is a huge car culture. And I realized people don't like to take any form of transit because they'd rather sit in traffic in their own car, in their own space, than reduce the number of roads, put in different light rail, all these different solutions. When you think about, I guess, different, and you mentioned New York, it's part of their culture, even though it's 100 years, and we'll get to that. When you look at different areas of the country, and you look at, there's different views even on how transportation should look. When you think about what Mozee's doing, and you look at the adoption of what you're hoping to achieve, I mean, talk to us a little bit about that, because I guess you have different parts of the country, different views on transportation, different experiences with mass transportation. What happens there?
Yeah, I mean, how we're deploying is a little more sensible. Obviously, I'm highly biased, but I'll actually talk about like what makes us a little more sensible, and that's how we deploy. So one, we're not on the business of just slapping sensors on vehicles, geofencing a part of the city, and then, just rolling out an app. We do see us as well as, robotaxis almost kind of like complementing each other. But like that's going to take some time for, again, for regulatory to catch up, for the overall like public perception to catch up as well. But yeah, how we deploy is much more sensible. So we have a, safety steward in the vehicle, and the whole purpose of that, of course, aside from, regulatory, is obviously like just passenger comfort. Like, again, having that, that, I guess, human in the loop. On top of that, we actually work with, cities. And so, I mean, the fact that, cities, like, typically their local transit authority, like, has like an idea of where like these vehicles like need to be deployed. They hold a lot more passengers, 10 to 12, like passengers, and they're also like ADA compliant. So it's a, all inclusive, vehicle, it's got the like communal seating, it's of course like temperature controlled. These are the things that need to happen, whether Mozee does it or not. Someone's got to do it, and it's much more sensible. And really what it is, it's a mesh network of these vehicles that can mosey you like through your city, or to take you from point A to point B. And it really starts at that first mile and last mile. That's really the biggest problem to solve. That's also why you saw a bunch of investments dumped into like Bird and Lime in 2016, 2017. But again, to my, earlier note, most cities don't have the infrastructure to even nourish that type of transit. West Coast, does a really good job of this, even in Austin, but in most cities, it's the same narrative. They don't have enough, bike lanes and things like that to actually, achieve that type of transit successfully. So, yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, you mentioned, and I guess maybe it'd be interesting to kind of walk through the vision, because obviously we're hearing of a lot of different ways that people are focused on transportation. With Mozee, you mentioned some of the things that are nice, right? Smaller vehicles. It's air conditioning controlled. It's already ADA compliant. If you're looking at a city, I mean, I guess Austin, or could use any city you'd like, kind of walk us through how does the future look? How do people interact with the vehicle, how many of these would need to be on the road to actually start moving the needle on getting people out of their cars into this? And maybe I'm going to give you a loaded question here, lots of parts, and I'll let you just talk. And the last part is, a lot of times when it comes to public transportation, especially in cities that are not as dense as New York, right? I live in Orange County, California. If you were dropped off a specific place, you still might just not be close enough to where you need to get to. I mean, you still might be a 20, 30-minute walk away. Anyways, I'll let you kind of give us a response there.
No, yeah, that's exactly spot on what we're focused on, is how do we bridge the gap from current, public transit offerings, and and also like what are some new ways that like we can also like be like a part of your like journey, right? And one of the big things is like the city of Arlington, right? It's in between Dallas and Fort Worth. We just actually moved our HQ there, as well as like final assembly for manufacturing. And a lot of people ask, like, why did you pick Arlington? And really it's or as Mayor Ross would say, like, it's in the middle of everything, right? Like, it's home of the Dallas Cowboys, Globe Life. It's also going to be the semifinal host for the FIFA World Cup. And that's the perfect city, from the large stadiums, the urban, sprawling communities. That's the perfect area to do that, at least that's what Mozee feels. And so obviously working with, like city officials on, bridging that gap. Maybe the bus station is, 1 to 2 miles away, or even like 6 blocks away. That could be, a big difference for someone going to school or like going to work. On top of that, say I'm going to a Dallas Cowboy game or some sports ball event, right? They have these massive, parking lots, and it usually takes, you're usually walking at least a mile to like a mile and a half away just to get to and from the stadium, being able to bridge that gap as well. And so it really starts with, how do we start to, one, bridge that gap in cities, but also two, what other like areas outside of stadiums, say it's a college campus, right? Like that's a high like need, and we've taken like a lot of interest. Airports, like things like that, where you don't have to build a whole rail system. You could just, we use existing infrastructure, and we can take you from point A to point B. So zero capex in terms of the, infrastructure cost. So
interesting. I guess as you're kind of looking at, you mentioned robotaxis, aren't the future. It's a different take on mass transit. Is convincing people to give up the notion of having their own car. I guess with robotaxis, we're even thinking, you're going to timeshare cars essentially. You don't necessarily need to own a car, I guess in some thoughts. But when you are thinking about there's still a single car on the road per person at any given time, blah, blah, blah. When you think about the mass transit component and I guess as you've just talked about the university example, that's a great use case. But as you think about adoption on a scale that would be bigger, is convincing people to give up their own car, is that actually a thing, or is that just we haven't gotten there, we haven't had the option to not have that car in the kind of transportation infrastructure you're talking about?
Yeah, I think for us, right, and how I see it is, I definitely see robotaxis as part of the future, just not the future, right? And why I say that is, if you look at rideshare, right, so Uber, Lyft, Alto, all these guys, over 70% of rideshare is done in 1 to 5 miles. So people don't really go that far. And so that's where that whole mesh network of a shuttle-like vehicle, again, whether it's Mozee or not, can actually drastically cut down on how people just, travel, within a city. Do I see like a Mozee or like, a company like Mozee like replacing public transit? No, not necessarily. But I actually see this kind of coordinated system of robotaxis and Mozee-like vehicles, and just people driving vehicles is almost, kind of a like symphony. Right now, like a lot of people will be like, well, that sounds like chaos. But, over time, I think, people will use less and less cars. I mean, like I remember last time I went to like New York, I was like, I just realized that the only time I even got in a car was to and from the airport. And I was like, wait a minute. Like I just now, I mean, it just dawned on me, right? Cause I just used like the subway system and it was great. And it was actually more efficient, like to do that versus taking, actual vehicle. Last time, like we were in Austin, like we brought a vehicle down for South by Southwest, and we realized that the most efficient way to get through the city was actually scooters. And it was like really convenient and it was much cheaper. And so, I think when people like start to like realize that, hey, like these services are like available and it's cost effective and it just works, people like will start to like leave their vehicles at home or like maybe just, for longer travel, right? So going maybe outside of the city, and things like that. But while I'm in the city, I don't have to deal with parking garages, just dealing with, like where's my vehicle, or I have to move my vehicle, but it's going to take a little bit of magic, like, for that to happen on the autonomy side of things, on like the regulatory side of things, government has to get behind it as well, which again, like Mozee's like doing a really good job of, working like with them on like, how do we make cities smarter? I mean, we make the saying here all the time is, you can't have a smart city with dumb transit. And that's a really big thing for a lot of cities is how do we make our cities smarter? So.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you were saying that, I know some people that do take the train further distances, so that they would need to do that anyways.
Yeah.
But they have either their spouse drive them to the train depot, or they go and leave their car, just depending on how things work in their home. Right. And it's like that act of having to take your car to that point and just to get it back again, which could be 5 minutes, could be 25 minutes. I'm like, that is actually something that is actually, it seems like it'd be very solvable with something like Mozee, because you don't necessarily need to do anything but get to point A to B, and you don't need your car to sit there for the next, I don't know, 8-10 hours while you're at work. I mean, it's literally just taking up space in a parking lot. And I'm like, that becomes such a value add to sit, potentially do some work, relax, whatever, not have to get hustle and bustle to get over there. I guess as you're talking about the government and wanting these smarter solutions, when it comes to, and obviously we've seen some tests of other autonomous vehicles. You've mentioned a few people are trying to deploy them, trying to test the safety and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to the government actual policy around this type of transportation, how much do they have to change their thinking? Is it, you mentioned they want the smarter transportation for a smarter city, but is this a quantum leap? Or are we talking about the foundations there? We just need to start sprinkling in these opportunities, or do they need to make big shifts to solve some of these problems?
It's a couple of things. Obviously, state by state does things, like different, like regulatory wise. Like for example, like the state of Texas, how they view, any, unmanned anything, right? Whether it's a food delivery robot or a robotaxi or a, unmanned vehicle. It's actually down to the county level on setting those like regulatory like measures. So it's, from the bottom up versus say the state of California, it's actually top down, right? So it's up to the state to actually set, and everybody else in the state of California just has to follow those rules. New York City actually requires a physical steering wheel, like on like autonomous vehicles, which is kind of weird because like here at Mozee, we don't have a steering wheel. Like there's just like a little like Atari like joystick to manually drive the vehicle. And so like, like there's like some challenges there that like we'll face as we deploy there. Right. And so right now it's just a bunch of, I think like a governing body, like at the federal level really has to help kind of set that. But then again, the states are going to do like what they're going to do. And so I really truly think it's going to take either a company like Mozee or someone that can kind of change the, overall public stance on how do, AV operators like ourselves roll out vehicles. Obviously I'm biased again, but we're in a really good position to do that because we work with local government as well as the state as well. Any city that we deploy in, like we want to like talk with them is like, hey, like where are your pain points at, right? Like where does it make sense, like, like for us to bridge a gap? And they love that. On top of that, we're collecting data on 32 different verticals. So everything from, like pothole detection, so like, again, like the data that we're collecting, we're actually feeding back to the cities to actually like improve their roads, things like that. Things that like they actually pay, a third party to do anyway. So on top of that, we're actually saving taxpayer dollars as well. And we just give that data to them, right? And so being able to not only, how do we like overall improve like the flow of traffic, maybe like we turn certain like parking spots into like like green spaces, and like parks actually improve the community, again, not taking away from the current public transit offerings, but those types of things are that's what's going to really kind of move the needle. I think for like a lot of these cities is they're looking for something else right now. They don't have a lot of options, but if there's something like this that can overall improve their current transit offerings, improve the city, lower, like taxpayer dollars on spending, everybody wins. But of course, that'll take time, and it's easier said than done. So
that is true. I had somebody on from Torque on a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And they're doing some fantastic things as well. And he mentioned the goal isn't to do one of anything. He said, it seems like a lot in this space, people are focused on, can I get one to the market? That the goal is, how do I get tens of thousands? I guess when you look at Mozee, and obviously you guys are, having these opportunities come up, New York City is one. You mentioned different regulations based on geography. When you were thinking about having a lot of these Mozee vehicles on the road, what are some of the things that you have to consider? What are some of the barriers to actually getting to that scale?
Yeah, like for us, and like I think one of the biggest lessons like that I've learned, like not only here at Mozee, just like like throughout my career, is progress is rarely like a straight line, and like like that's okay, right? Like I think a lot of like guys in our space, or not guys and gals, but a lot of people in our space, like we really are focused on how do we get to like if I could get just a small fleet of our vehicles like on the market. And really it's not necessarily like, I understand like what they're trying to do, but something that we do here at Mozee very well is we're very mission driven, and it has to make sense and be human centered. If it's not human centered, like it has to be human centered, not product centered. And that's where a lot of the industry is hyper focused on, is like, look at my robotaxi with all these like sensors. It actually frightens most people. And so that's one of the things, is our vehicles are less like like they're more like approachable. How we deploy is entirely different, but it needs to be human centered, because those are the types of products that go much further than just a cool novelty, of like a product. And so like leading with like that in mind, I mean, it's part of our DNA, right? I mean, like we're constantly learning, I mean, if you would have asked me even 3 years ago, like what are my thoughts on transit? I would have no idea, I wouldn't be able to like answer that question. I knew nothing about how cities move, or how like government moves, or how, economic development moved. And really that first year and a half to 2 years at Mozee, like just talking with these like cities and just learning like what do they truly care about, right? And that's what really kind of helped us shape on, again, not only how we deploy but where we deploy. And that's quite important. Like for instance, we have a air particulate sensor that actually goes in the back of the vehicle for like gas leaks and bird calls. And I remember like when our team was like, yeah, we can do bird calls, and I was like, who cares about bird calls? Like I was like, why are we spending time on this? Parks and Rec for like cities care a whole lot about bird calls. The air particulate sensor on the back of the vehicle. Well, like during the summer, there's a spike in asthma cases, which actually, like fills more like, like hospital beds. And then that trickles down to like ambulance calls, and all those things like trickle around, again, it's, how a city like functions. And these are just, again, sensors on our vehicles that already, aggregate this data. things again that we wouldn't have learned if it wasn't for working directly with these cities. So
those are some interesting.
Yeah. So it's a very different view. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is very different. I mean, talking to you in terms of, your view on an autonomous vehicle, its role in the in society, and the function around smarter transportation. I guess I wasn't going to hold you to this, but I am kind of curious. We do see the testing, we see the progress. Is there a vision of timeline that you look out and go, you know what? I really think by a certain time we'll see some enough shift where people are giving up their cars maybe for things that they wouldn't need to use them for if the option was available.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's already happening like right now. Like, I would be surprised if we didn't see some noticeable shift by like 2028. I mean, like, things are progressing like really, really quickly, especially, I think Tesla has done a really good job, in terms of, and they actually kind of shocked the market, right? Because they're using vehicles you could literally buy right now, right? I mean, you're talking a $35,000 like Model Y that you can buy, and they just deployed it, and it's just taking people, there's a safety store there, but they literally took a $35,000, vehicle that you can just buy right now, and they're running it as a robotaxi. I mean, if that's not a proof of like, we're like getting really, like close, then I don't know what is. When you look at the industry, it's a bunch of these companies, and I'm not bashing any of them because they've all done great things, but they're slapping all these sensors and like they're mapping the streets and all these things. And Tesla just like geofenced part of the city and like rolled them out. And I was like, that is incredible. So again, like, so yeah, we're really, really close. I think, as they deploy more and more and, people get to kind of experience it. Honestly, self-driving vehicles are actually quite boring. Like, once you, experience it, like, it's not anything. It's just like, yeah, it's just nothing really exciting about it. I mean, at first, you kind of get that wow factor of, oh, the steering wheel is moving by itself. But then maybe after 5 minutes, you kind of just go to scrolling on your phone or, so self-driving itself is actually quite boring, but it's like, you're also getting your time back, right? Like, you're getting time to do other things other than focusing on like traffic. And that's the beauty in it.
Absolutely. I guess last question, this may be a side question to Mozee. I guess when you first saw this problem space, wanting to get involved, what made you identify, mass transportation and this type of autonomous vehicle infrastructure you're looking at solving? What pulled you in?
Yeah, I mean, Mozee originally started off as any other autonomous vehicle company focused on robotaxis. And then once we started to do everything from like market like validation, and really we just dived into like the nitty gritty of how transit works, how it works in America, in Europe, like Japan, how, other like countries are handling, like transit. And there was one stat that really stuck out to me, and it was 150 million Americans have no access to public transit. That was crazy to me. And this was, again, like 4 years ago. So I'm sure the numbers are not that far off, but half of America has no access to public transit. And, you couple that with like food, like deserts, which, we actually have one here, south of Dallas, and like there's a farm called like Bonton Farms, and actually, like volunteered there many years ago. And that farm served for like two like purposes. One was for like, second, like chances, like for people like, who had served some time. But the other thing was it actually like served as like a grocery store, because the nearest grocery store was like 2 miles away, which, isn't a big deal for some people because they have a vehicle. But imagine like walking for 4 miles and, by the way, like going there and then, you can only, get what like, you can actually like carry. And that really hit me, and, of course we have the Dallas, area, like rapid, like transit here, but it doesn't even operate there and it's only a mile away. So it's like a mile away, like in the middle of food desert. And that's the same narrative, like across the country. Like roughly half America, no access to public transit. We started to see like this shift on how like cities are, almost like reshaping themselves, right? Like the whole, like, mixed use. And so all of that, like, coupled together is like robotaxis is not the solution. In fact, when you look at robotaxis, say there's like like a deployment in Austin, well, 20% of the vehicles that are not, shuttling passengers are just roaming the city. So they're adding, like, to like congestion, versus say like a Uber or Lyft driver, he's going to like park at like a 7-Eleven and wait like until he gets a ride. Like, he's not just going to be driving around. And so again, like, there's things like that just doesn't make sense. Again, robotaxis have like a play, but we still have a long way to go on just what that looks like at scale. And just what really matters is we have a transportation problem in this country, not we need more robots. So, and I'm all about robots. I mean, we're building robots. So
I love it. Shawn,
yeah.
Appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing with us. If somebody wants to learn more, has a follow-up question, what are good ways of reaching out? Yeah,
just our website, like mozeealong.com. Like, we're also on like, Instagram, just Mozee.official. But yeah, you can find us there.
Okay, awesome. That's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, Shawn walked us through what it's looking like out there in reshaping, and making smarter public transportation available to people. Lots of moving parts. And we talked about the relationship with robotaxis and how he sees Mozee fitting in, or similar services fitting in, and kind of trying to give people back time and solve some of these problems that we've all been dealing with and gotten used to. So please share this episode with somebody else who might benefit from listening to it. Also, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.